Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. Michael here. Had a little hiatus, but back in the saddle, and I got something that's been percolating on my mind the last several weeks that I want to deliver to you in hopefully a very succinct manner. But before we kind of break it down, I want to give a quick prologue. And let me just say, I firmly believe, wholeheartedly, the liberal legacy media cannot be trusted, okay? But I also want to say this. I get it. Look, everyone has a bias. I have a bias. You have a bias. The people you listen to have a bias. I think it's important to understand that. I had a conversation recently which I think stimulated some thoughts that I think are important to discuss. And so we go to outlets for the most part. I think everyone goes to outlets to feed on narratives we already kind of are predisposed to, or we have penchants to. I get it. Like, if you can't stand President Trump, you're going to watch CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, CNN. You're going to read the New York Times. You're going to read the Washington Post. Because all of those outlets are overwhelmingly negative towards Donald Trump. Doesn't matter what he's done. It's just, that's the truth. I'll mention a quick stat here in a second to further just validate what I'm saying. So I get it, man. And so I'm going to listen to news sources. I'll be honest. I don't want to listen to news sources that are going to be overly critical about President Trump. I don't want to hear it. I believe much of it's manipulated, but I get it. I clearly want to listen to news sources that fit around what I believe. Okay, so I just want to acknowledge that. All of us have that predisposition. And if you don't acknowledge that, well, that's a problem. If you're saying, well, I just listen to objective, no, okay, look, all of us listen to media, even the most objective in our minds, because they present narratives that we agree with, overwhelmingly agree with. So I think it's important for all of us, for myself included, to acknowledge that, okay? Now, a few things I want to mention. We have to find the most reliable, all right? That's just the bottom line. Find the most reliable. So, for example, I'm going to try to find, even in the parameters I put up, the most reliable, the most objective, even in their bias, that they possibly can. I'm going to try to engage with those people, okay? Listen to those people. I'm going to talk about Tucker Carlson, that's the majority of what I listen to are his interviews with experts, people he talks with that break down that are not traditionally Republicans. Specifically, he's the main person I listen to. Now, I'll talk more about that here in a second. But so I want to acknowledge that, and I also want to exhort individuals to listen to people who are the most reliable. And I'm going to talk here in a second about why the liberal legacy media just are not reliable. Even if you can't stand Donald Trump and you're not Republican, you're not conservative, I'm going to give hopefully a compelling argument as to why you cannot indulge their continual narratives anymore. Just can't do it. And here's a few criteria to consider as we go on to the next part. One is look at historical precedent. And I think 10 years gives us such good data, anecdotal, but also just flat out empirical data that demonstrates how corrupt and how flagrant the legacy media has been with their news stories. And who am I talking about with legacy media? I already mentioned it, but I'll do it again. ABC, CBS, okay? Also, we'll kind of give offshoots with MSNBC, who's an offshoot of NBC, CNN, Washington Post, New York Times. When I think of the legacy media, I think of those conglomerates, but specifically ABC, CBS, and NBC, okay? Also, so we talked about one of the criteria. Look at historical precedent. The last 10 years, how honest have they been? We can look at news stories, and I'm going to do that here in a second, and just talk about how flagrantly they fomented lies. Also, just a humility. So one of the things I love about Tucker is his meekness in acknowledging his error in the past. He's talked about, incessantly, how he was a proponent of the Iraq War, a proponent of us going in there, a proponent of the narrative that Iraq had WMDs. He's come and honestly, it's incessant on how he acknowledges him being a part of the problem with the news media back in, 2003, 2004. All right, so again, if you're looking at two criteria, look at historical precedent, how accurate has their reporting been, and we can look at the last 10 years, and we will, and also when they're wrong, when they're proven they're wrong. How honest are they in acknowledging, hey, look, this is a news story we incessantly promoted. Are we sorry? Are we not just like acknowledging it, but telling you, the audience, we were wrong, we were in error, and we're sorry, repenting. So that's my prologue. Let me start with, why the last 10 years has demonstrated, or how the last 10 years has demonstrated the legacy media has fomented significant, flagrant news stories that were substantively false, and I would say overt disinformation. Disinformation is information being fomented by individuals with the intent of deceiving, okay? I'm going to mention three big events, the last 10 years. And these are microcosms of far greater news stories, but these are just three things that, again, aren't just news stories like, hey, you know what, we're reporting a Category 4 hurricane when it really was a Category 3. Facts like that sometimes get distorted in news reporting, okay? Let me just say this before I start. Let me say one thing. I understand that conservative outlets aren't 100% infallible. I get that. But as I said, the most reliable, because we have to metabolize the information we're getting and then try to make sense of it the best we can with the most accurate information available. Because it's easy to say, I need to say one more thing, then I will continue. It's easy to say, well, you know what, both sides of the coin present narratives that are false. It's easy to say that. Obviously, that's true. Certain conservative networks will present things that aren't wholly accurate, okay? That's true. But there's a significant and fundamental difference with presenting narratives intentionally to deceive, to distort, and try to pollute people's minds into narratives. And I'm just gonna fundamentally say, and I have no problem saying this, the liberal legacy media does that consistently, while independent journalists in the conservative circles do not do that on par, even on a relatively close level. It's not even close, all right? Okay, three things. So first is the Russiagate hoax back in 2016. I was actually in the FBI during this time, okay? And I just remember hearing this, and even at the time I'm like, there's something off here. Like Donald Trump being a Russian puppet and conspiring with with Russia and the Kremlin to steal the 2016 election. Let me just say this. I can't break this down enough. There's tons of people out there who've broken this down, and the FBI has actually opened up investigations with the previous FBI director, James Comey, and the previous CIA director, John Brennan, which is great. We're finally kind of getting some justice here, I feel, or hopefully so. But they legitimately, the media conspired. This is not hyperbole. This actually happened. They conspired with our intelligence agencies, along with the Democrat National Committee, to circulate this Steele dossier. Christopher Steele was former MI6, British intelligence. They literally, the DNC hired this guy, along with even John McCain, I believe, hired this guy to create a fake document about Donald Trump conspiring with the Russians. Was completely a lie, was not verified. So the FBI during this time, James Comey, worked alongside news networks to peddle this narrative, to begin an investigation by Robert Mueller, who's appointed a special counsel by Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy Attorney General, because Jeff Sessions recused himself, and that was just a complete hoax. He recused himself, so Rod Rosenstein, who's the Deputy AD, appointed Robert Mueller to begin this special counsel investigation. That was completely a lie. Guys, Pulitzer Prizes were given to individuals from the New York Times, I believe the Washington Post, because of their excellent news reporting. Guys, it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on. This has been proven not just a lie, but we're talking about. Think about how diabolical this is. We have intel agencies working alongside news media. All the news media I mentioned right there, every single one of them were legitimately, incessantly reporting that Donald Trump was an agent of the Kremlin, the president of the United States. They were doing this, and they have yet to apologize. They have yet to acknowledge their flagrant misreporting. And I sit here thinking about, I can't believe Americans, even if you're a Democrat or liberal, think about not just the injustice, but the danger and the precedent this sets. If if that right there does not immediately give you not just reservation, but complete distrust, well, maybe the second thing I'm going to mention does. So think about this. And also I'm going to mention this, how funny this is. In 2020, when Donald Trump and many others, as a matter of fact, millions of people, including myself, believe the 2020 election was not just irregular, but was actually concocted and stolen, they literally, the media literally tried to censor and suppress any news story that propagated that. And yet they propagated a narrative that was completely a lie, completely concocted, completely fictitious. And yet in 2020, they censored and suppressed anything that had to do with the 2020 election being irregular. We're having irregularities. Just logically insane. I could continue to talk about that, but I just want to kind of, again, I'm giving you some just bread bites. All right. Second thing, which this to me is still being fleshed out. Okay. Because this, the COVID-19, that whole hysteria, we're still, the government right now is still trying to flesh out what actually happened during 2020. Okay. And I'm not going to get into necessarily all of the different beliefs that have emanated from that period. What I'm going to talk about is a few things that the media constantly fomented that have been completely proven to be a lie. All right, first, we heard all about the vaccine, right? The vaccine stopping transmission. Anyone who said the vaccine would stop transmission, you are a conspiracy theorist, you're a liar, you're a threat to our health. Anyone who said that was branded a conspiracy theorist and a liar. Well, proved like within months, transmission, or the vaccines did not stop transmission. The people who got the vaccines were still getting COVID-19 and were still transmitting it to other people. Completely a lie. How many news stations how many editorials has the New York Times, the Washington Post presented talking about how they were just wrong and telling us over and over again how vaccines would stop transmission? Completely a lie. Okay? So, one example. The next, all right, let me make sure I have this correctly. Okay, the next, quarantine. We see with even other nations in Europe, I believe, I want to say it was Switzerland possibly, or Finland, one of the Scandinavian countries, I can't remember, but totally didn't quarantine, okay, during COVID-19. I can't remember what it was, but it was one of those countries. Proven that quarantining did not actually stop transmission, did not actually help at all. That's been proven to be a complete fallacy. How much of the legacy media, how many times do they tell us incessantly, you had to quarantine to control the spread, to control the transmission? Completely a lie. Okay, another thing. Also, after that, the origin of where COVID-19 came from, right? Where it emanated from. Anyone who said it came from a lab in Wuhan was branded a conspiracy theorist, right? Branded a conspiracy theorist, you're a liar, you need to be censored, that narrative is suppressed. What happens now? Obviously, factually, it came from the Wuhan lab. And we also know Anthony Fauci, who was propped up as this like arbiter of truth when it came to COVID-19. There's so many things about him that's just so corrupt to the core. How he's invested in gain-of-function research. And gain-of-function research, if you don't know anything about that, is literally creating these like toxic plagues, viruses like COVID-19, creating them in labs, funding them. Totally proven that Anthony Fauci has been a proponent and has invested in gain-of-function research. Okay? Totally. And how much of the news media has acknowledged this? How many of the news media has acknowledged, actually, you know what? The Wuhan lab was the origin of COVID-19. And there's so much more I could go. So many more things I could talk about. Mention one more thing. The whole narrative about COVID-19, anything, especially the three things I just mentioned, any narrative during that time that was presented that contradicted that was completely suppressed. I'll mention one thing about CNN. CNN incessantly branded Joe Rogan, who took ivermectin, as a dewormer. You can't take ivermectin. I mean, ivermectin, which has been proven to help curb the side effects of COVID-19. branded as a dewormer. You're presenting a false, phony medication that's not going to help the conditions of COVID-19, proven to actually be effective. Joe Rogan took it, President Trump took it, many others took ivermectin, right? CNN constantly fomented this, constantly criticized, ridiculed, impugned anyone who took ivermectin, along with other news media. How many of them have come out and said, you know what, we were wrong? None. So again, what I mentioned, let me harken back to the beginning. Lies, okay, from the media, lies, right, in the last 10 years, these two things, right, lies, COVID-19, lies, Russiagate, and then number two is, have they come out and recanted and said, we were wrong? Two pieces of criteria. No, they haven't. Let me just mention really quickly, because I'm going to juxtapose, because many of you will say, or some of you will say, conservative news networks were constantly, okay, tell me the last 10 years, significant narratives that conservative outlets have reported in the last 10 years that were lies. I mean, proven to be lies. And I'm not even talking about Fox News, because Fox News kind of falls into the legacy media in many ways, I think. I think they're unreliable, but they're far better than the legacy media of CBS, NBC, ABC, CNBC, or MSNBC, and CNN. But prove to me other independent journalists who are conservatives, even John Solomon of Just the News, who's objective but more so conservative leaning. What lies have they promulgated? What lies have they circulated that even compares with those two things? Lastly, okay, and this is so significant because this really kind of compares conservative news networks to liberal news networks. Joe Biden, when he was fictitiously elected in 2020, had significant cognitive impairments. All you had to be was just an objective onlooker and see this guy, something is fundamentally wrong with him. Like early stages of dementia, then it ramping up year after year when he was in office, or supposedly in office, because he wasn't running the country. That was just objectively clear. But you had news networks constantly, MSNBC, Morning Joe, they were the most prominent news network, saying this guy is as sharp as a tack, man. He's on top of it. They would put on people from the cabinet telling you how sharp he was. When he was not running the country, guys, he was cognitively impaired. Cognitively was not there at all. That's just proven. There's no ambiguity there. And these news networks collectively use the same exact verbiage, the same exact jargon, and constantly would tell us how sharp, how intelligible he was, and how we needed to rely on their news reporting. Now, and it's not even now it's being reported. Now that Trump is the president, and he's actually trying to initiate investigations of this auto pen and how reliable this news reporting was, and how reliable the people in the cabinet were and how enabling they were with Joe Biden's clearly cognitive state. This stuff, guys, cannot be forgotten. And I could continue to hash this out more. These three things, though, are abundantly, they're just microcosms of how the news networks, the liberal legacy media, has lied to us, has deceived and polluted our minds for a certain objective. And if you're just watching this live right now, I encourage you to look back at some of the stuff I've talked about. Let me mention one more thing. During the presidential news cycle, this is just, again, it's laughable. I mean, even if you hate President Trump, you can't, this statistic came out, I believe, I can't recall the exact entity to put this out, but I believe they're not even conservative leaning. This is just a kind of a objective reporting. 85% of the coverage during the presidential election of 2024 was negative for Donald Trump, okay, with the legacy media, the media networks I mentioned. 78% was positive for Kamala Harris. It's a 63% discrepancy. The greatest discrepancy of any presidential candidates running for office in history. That just is. I mean, guys, if you can't acknowledge 85%, and I've heard, honestly, some other statistics up to 95%. Probably more reliable 95%. I don't think there was 15% positive reporting of President Trump at all. I couldn't have been. But think about that. Even if 85% is the lowest margin, think how crazy that is. Again, so if you're going to continue to listen to these news networks, you have to understand you're just going to not acknowledge those four things I just mentioned, which are not me just editorializing or opining about something that's not factually proven. It's not only anecdotal, it's empirical. This stuff is out there, it's true. Let me mention one more thing as I close, okay? And this is something that's super important. If you do a little bit of research, you begin understanding who funds and who owns these networks, okay? Let me mention something about just the CBS, NBC, and ABC, okay? You have to understand, there are these entities called institutional investors, okay? Also called global investment management firms, like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Okay, this could take a long time to try to rehash, okay? I'm just going to give you, or hash out, I should say. I'm going to give you a very cursory bit of information about these institutional investors who own heavy interests in these news networks, okay? So BlackRock, for example, they were big proponents of things called ESGs, environmental, and I'm going to tell my wife because she's texting me right now, and I say this lovingly, yes, I'm almost done. Almost done! Okay, she was texting me, and I had to answer that. I can't type while I'm talking, guys, so you have to forgive me. All right. This is like me trying to be very, I'm compartmentalized, but I'm having to be a multitasker right now, okay? And this is not my forte typically, but I'm going to zone back in because we're almost done. So institutional investors, BlackRock, they have things called, you've heard of ESGs, environmental social governance, aka DEI. So they have billions and billions of dollars invested in like companies like Nabisco and General Mills and Best Buy, places like that. I mean, all over the world, okay? So basically, this is a real kind of simplification of this, but they're basically telling these companies, look, in order for us to continue to invest, because they have billions of dollars of shares in these companies, you need to promote climate change hysteria, for example. You need to hire and make sure your marketing is catered towards DEI, LGBTQ. All that stuff was just true, okay? So you have these news networks who are heavily funded by places like BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, okay? Whose political proclivities are very, very left, very, very progressive. And you'll hear people say, well, you know what? They're pragmatic. They give to both parties. But you know what? There are plenty of people in the Republican Party who are rhinos like Mitt Romney, like George W. Bush, who are totally, at their core, a progressive, okay? So mentioning that people gave money to Mitt Romney or even George W. Bush does nothing for me, okay? They're not actual true conservative, America First conservatives, okay? So I just want to make sure I clarify that. So you have these institutional investors who are giving billions of dollars into companies who have narratives they have to promote. So these companies, okay, these news networks who are heavily funded by institutional investors, they have no autonomy. So when they're presenting narratives, they have to present narratives in a certain way that promotes those ideologies and philosophies. It's just the truth. And you look at CBS, who is, they are predominantly, or they're Paramount Global, okay, excuse me, they're Paramount Global, and then Paramount Global is predominantly owned by the Redstone family. And if you look at like Sharon Redstone, someone like that who's given, so much to progressive causes, to like this social justice hysteria, all of the stuff, which again, veers predominantly towards the left. And so I just want to go ahead and say, look, if you want to continue to listen, and again, I give you a very cursory bit of information there with these institutional investors and people who own and fund news networks, okay? But this is just the truth. You can do your own research there. I encourage you to do your own research. Look where the money's coming from, and look where these entities, where their ideology is, where their philosophy is, okay? So if you have these entities, these news networks who are aligned with these institutional investors, okay, who are predominantly desiring to foment a message that is not actually consistent with what most Americans believe, they're going to concoct their news stories to fit around a narrative, and they're going to filter it through that type of garbage. It's a simplistic way for me to describe this, but it is just the truth. And as I said, if you want to continue to watch ABC, NBC, ABC, read the New York Post, read the New York Times, listen to CNN, listen to MSNBC, if you want to do that, you just have to acknowledge these news networks are overwhelmingly influenced by people who have vested interest for them to present narratives in a very concocted way. And so when I talk about like independent journalists like Tucker Carlson, okay, I'm going to end with this, okay? When I listen to Tucker Carlson, right, he's totally autonomous, okay? He raises his own money. He does advertisements for conservative brands. He is not owned and operated by these entities, okay? That's why independent journalists are so much more reliable, okay? And I'd even say someone like as much as Bill Maher is like, well, actually, I'm not going to go there. Like, I'm going to bring it back in. I was going to talk about Bill Maher. I'm not going to. Okay, I'm going to focus on Tucker. Focus, okay? Tucker, for example, he'll do interviews with people. Like hour and a half, two and a half hour interviews. Even Joe Rogan. People like that who do interviews with people who come from different perspectives, who aren't even Republican orthodoxy, who doesn't even promote Republican orthodoxy. But he's asking questions. He's curious enough to try to get to the truth. And obviously he's biased because he's more conservative for sure. But if you watch his content, he legitimately asks questions, hard questions, curious questions to try to get to the truth. There's not one liberal media member who would conduct an interview like Tucker Carlson conducted with Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, one of the most conservative Republicans in Congress. I mean, like he rode the Tea Party wave into election in 2010, hugely conservative. If you haven't watched Tucker Carlson's conversation with him, it was intense, super intense. Challenged Ted Cruz. Went to war with Ted Cruz, no pun intended, about the Iran controversy with Israel and with us. You couldn't give me one, because Tucker Carlson is arguably the most popular conservative independent journalist out there. Not one liberal media journalist would ever conduct that interview. Wouldn't do it, couldn't do it. And so what I'm trying to paint here is a clear contrast between people. If you're listening to that stuff, understand you're just going to get a narrative that's completely diluted. And if you're okay with that, if you're like, you know what, I hate Trump so much, I hate what's going on right now so much that I just have to have this, to pet my own, insatiable desire for a narrative that's anti-Trump, then you're going to listen to that stuff. But if there's a part of you who's willing to just say, you know what, I'm not going to go to Tucker Carlson route, okay, whatever, but I just can't listen to this stuff anymore because it's toxic. I would challenge you. Stop listening to it for a month if you do, and just see what happens. I'm not telling you got to listen to overt conservative media members, although I think if you do, you're going to find much more reliable resources because, as I said, you cannot go the last 10 years and compare the lies that have been debunked and proven on the left side of media compared to the right side. You just can't do it. There actually is not it's not even comparable. So I'd encourage you, do your research, understand that these media networks, it's almost like witchcraft. I would equate it to witchcraft because the intent is to manipulate your mind to fit around a narrative. And when you understand that the people who own and operate these news networks have a clear agenda, you understand why they do it. It's understandable. So I'm not even mad at you if you listen to this stuff because it's understandable. They're really effective at brainwashing. They're very effective at it. All right, I'm done, guys. That was a cursory bit of information, but I thought it was really meat packed. Hopefully you got some meaningful things there that can help you kind of metabolize this information. Anyway, y'all have a blessed Sunday. You'll have a great start to the week, and I'll be back at some point. All right, later.